The budget now just hours away. Important to focus on the big picture and what we would be watching for here at BQ. Lots of interesting details will come through in the fine print, and we will bring you those. But here are the headline issues to be watching out for. As always, the fiscal deficit will be all important this time around, particularly because the sharp drop in nominal GDP growth that we've seen during the year, which has went very weak. Tax collections, expenditure cuts, so they came in towards the end of the year. So almost everybody expects the government will not be able to meet its budget estimate of a 3.3% of GDP fiscal deficit. What will the number finally settle at? Well, the expectation is between 3.7 to 3.8%. But there is a range there because people still don't know what the final tax collection numbers will look like. This time around, non-tax has seen two aspects. You had larger than expected contribution from the RBI's dividend, but a shorter than expected contribution from disinvestment. So all of that math will add up to something like 3.7 to 3.8%. Now, I haven't put in a budget estimate for FY21 because so much depends on where the final number ends up at. If it ends up at 3.7 to 3.8, how much consolidation will the government pursue in a year when the economy is weak? That's a big point of debate. Economists are ranging from a 3.7 FY20 number going to 3.5 in FY21. Others saying that you will end up at somewhere around 3.7 to 3.8, and then you would probably stay there in FY21. So lots of debate. That will also link into the borrowing amount. The market is expecting a gross borrowing amount of somewhere in the region of 8 lakh crore. So that's the broad expectation. But, this time around, you could go way off or you could be absolutely on point. There is also going to be an interesting debate which may not eventually play out. But, the FRBM review committee had allowed the government something called an escape clause. Essentially, under times of extreme stress, war, structural change, or a sharp fall in growth, the government was allowed a 0.5 percentage point escape clause on the budget estimate for the fiscal deficit. Now, the question being asked is, does the government invoke that escape clause? If the government invokes that escape clause, it has a very significant potential implication because the amendments to the FRBM Act had said that in the eventuality that the escape clause is triggered, the Reserve Bank may subscribe to the primary issues of central government securities. This is critical. We don't know if it will happen, but this is critical because India had moved away from what was called as automatic monetization of the deficit. If the escape clause is actually invoked, and if the RBI does buy primary issues of central government securities, then it is financing the deficit very, very directly, and that's not a good or a healthy sign at all. But let's get back to some of the other issues that are at play. When you get the fiscal deficit number, assuming it's 3.7 or 3.8, the debate about what the real fiscal deficit is will continue. Former Economic Affairs Secretary Subhash Chandra Garg, in a post had said that you need to add 3 items to the headline fiscal deficit. Some of those off-budget spending items like the bank recapitalization bonds should be added, dues to Food Corporation India should be added, and fully serviced government bonds should be added back to debt as well. So if you take all of that into account, the real fiscal deficit, according to Garg, would be around 4.5 to 5% in FY20. So I think if the government gives you a number of 3.7 to 3.8, there's going to be a lot of mathematics happening to understand what the real level of fiscal deficit is. That's certainly going to catch a fair amount of attention. The other thing that's going to catch a fair amount of attention is what is the level of nominal GDP that the government actually uses for its budget calculations. Last year, it was 11. This year, now, growth has fallen to 7.5% nominal GDP growth in FY20. What will they peg it at in FY21? Most economists say that while the economy may have bottomed out, the recovery will be very weak. So even a 10% number will look lofty. Will they be realistic in setting their nominal GDP estimates? That'll something that'll get a lot of attention. And then linked to that, based on what your nominal GDP estimates are, you would be talking about what your budgeted growth in tax collections is. So if you have a nominal GDP projection which is very optimistic, then your tax collection growth will also look optimistic. On the other hand, if they're prudent in their nominal GDP estimate, then perhaps they will estimate for a lower growth in tax tax collections as well. Non-tax revenue far smaller, but this time around the focus will be on disinvestment, because in FY20 they didn't manage to meet their target. They've started some important divestment processes, including Air India, so it does look like they will have a large number there. They will not have a very large number on the RBI dividends part, because the issue over the RBI's capital framework has now been resolved. So from here onwards, it will largely be dividend business as usual from the Reserve Bank of India. Some of the sectoral issues that will be watched out for. There is large hope of a personal income tax cut. Whether it's possible given the fiscal constraints or not, we don't know. But if the consumers are under stress, well, at least the urban consumers, can you give them some relief through a personal income tax cut? Financial sector repair is top of mind once again. Very few believe that enough has been done between the government and the regulator to ease some of the financial constraints. Credit growth is still very low. So will they do something more to ease the constraints on the NBFC sector? The word bad bank has started to float around again. We'll see if something comes out of that. Allocation to support the rural economy will be important. The PM Kisan spends were not entirely used up in FY20. Will they budget a lower amount in FY21, or will they continue to make structural changes and ensure that a large amount of money does flow through to farmers via that scheme? There is also hope that you would see some announcement, at least for an intention to list on global bond indices. A lot of people are saying at a time when your domestic household financial savings are perhaps getting entirely taken up by public sector borrowings, you need to start opening up to foreign capital. And one way to do that is to list on global bond indices, which will bring in a large number of funds who have so far remained uninvested in India. So that's the very big picture, broad overview. We'll be back full day on BQ on Saturday with budget programming.